Welcome, everyone. In this screencast, we're going to review PowerBase dedupe rules. Now, databases aren't the smartest things in the world, and you have to tell it what you want it to do, particularly around finding existing records so that the database doesn't, duplicate a record, for example, when a contribution comes in. So you can create rules to let the database know what does a duplicate record look like. So to review the rules, we're going to go to the menu under Contacts, Find and Merge Duplicates, and you're going to see the rules. So there's different rules for different contact types. Now in PowerBase, we don't use household rules, we use relationships, so you could ignore that. But then you could take a look that there's individual rules for individual records and organizational rules. Let's take a look at the individual rules first. So this is about people. And there's different types of rules. There's a rule that's called an unsupervised rule. There's a supervised rule, and then there's these general ones. Unsupervised rules, think of it as your strictest rule. It means that there's no human intervention. So the rule has to tell the database exactly what you consider a duplicate contact. And so this usually happens like if somebody's filling out a contribution form, an event registration form, petition, or any kind of online form where you're not sitting there and telling the database what to do. The database has to be told. In this case, if you see here, it's using name and email as the duplicate rule. So it's going to do a match on the first name, the last name, and the email address, and that's that rule. So that's the strictest rule. So you can only have one unsupervised rule, and you can change these rules, and we'll take a look at that. The supervised rule, you can also only have one supervised rule, is a rule where requires human intervention. So first name and last name makes sense because the database can't tell if that's the same Tom Jones is the same as a different Tom Jones, whether they're living in the same city or not. So requires human intervention. And this usually is the case when you're doing, when you're adding a new contact, like when you add a new name, an individual, usually it's asking you as soon as you start putting in a first name and then a last name, it's going to start asking you, hey, is this the same person? So you need to have that rule. And we totally advise keeping the supervised rule with the first name and last name. The unsupervised rule you definitely can change, but we could take a look at that. Name and address, these general rules, you can have other kinds of dedupe rules that you want to run because maybe you want to do some data cleanup. So there's one that we always create that's called just one on email. So you can run the rule just by clicking use rule, and then you can see what in the database where emails are the same. Same thing with the name and address. This is just name and street address, basically. First name, last name, and street address is going to see if there's the same. You could just click on use rule, and you can do the deduping there. There's another section, another screencast on deduping. We'll discuss that. But let's take a look at how the rules are set up. For example, for first name and last name, if I just click on edit rule, here's the supervised. You have to sort of categorize what you want, the kind of rule it is. And again, this is first name and last name. Notice you're sort of grabbing the field that you want to match on. And in this case, we're going to just use weights. This is a fun math problem. Weight is just basically saying, if the first name matches, give it a point of 1. If the last name matches, give it another 1. So for it to be a complete match, they have to add up to 2. So that means 1, both of them the first name and the last name have to match. If it adds up to 2, then you know it's a match, right? So that's how the logic works. Let's go back to our dedupe rules. And again, it's under contacts, find and merge duplicate contacts. Let's take a look at how we can edit a rule or change a rule. And usually this happens with your individual rules because it depends. Let's say this rule, this unsupervised rule would work if you're always collecting the first name, last name, and email. Now, what if you're engaging and organizing folks that may not have an email? So you're looking at phone number is what you're really collecting, or maybe the street address is what you're really collecting. So there's a mix of things. So this, if they don't have an email, this unsupervised rule doesn't quite work. So I'm going to show you how to create a stricter rule if, let's say, you are relying on phone numbers or street address, and how to create a rule there. So since this is a reserved rule, I have to sort of create a new rule. I can't edit this rule. Like, notice if it's a reserved rule, you can't edit it, right? You can't do anything here. So what I'm going to do is just create a new unsupervised rule. And I'm going to click Add Rule for Individuals. And here, this is also how you can add other rules that maybe you want to check for. And this one I'm going to be specific. I'm going to go first name and last name. And let's say now I want to have email or phone or street address. So this gives you, it will then take a look at all these elements to see if there's matches. So let me describe then how we create this. So first I'm going to make sure this is going to be my strictest rule. So I'm going to replace the other unsupervised rule with this one. And I'm going to first grab all the fields I need. So there's the first name, there's the last name, there's the email. And again, these are going to check all the different email fields. Same thing, all the different, if you have multiple phones, if you have multiple phone numbers, multiple street addresses, it's going to check all those different ones. So this is the phone, and this is the street address. So I'm not going to use length. Length is used if you're going to say the first 5 characters. I'm going to strongly suggest not to use length, particularly in your unsupervised rule. Again, you don't want the database can get confused. You just want it to look for exact matches. So I'm going to use fun math here, and I'm going to go and say 5, 5. And again, you can put whatever number here. It's just figuring out the math that's going to work. So if I want first name, last name, and either the email or the phone or the street address, I need this to add up to 12, right? So if you look at the logic, to add to 12, you got to have at least the first name and the last name, and then one of the others, because these add 2, right? So 5, 5, and then, or one of these 2. It won't match on last name with a 5 and an email or phone, right? Or even with the street address, it needs the first name and last. So that's how that works. I'm going to click on Save, and that's how you use the rules. And then when you're ready to use a rule, you would just click on Use Rule. You would just click on Use Rule, and then you'll end up on a dedupe screen, which we'll show in another screencast.